Digital Seikos in space. James Bond watches galore, the coolest world timers, seriously weird digitals, and perhaps a re-emergence. That's right, move over Casio and Timex, it's Seiko time, and there's some seriously fun stuff in here. They may be less known for their digitals now, but they were real innovators back in the day. A quick sidebar and an important thing to know which colours the history of Seiko watch design, including the case of digital watches, is the existence of both the Suwa and Daini Seikosha, each with their own maker's marks. These essentially ran as two different units that would compete against each other, with both having their own design divisions from the late 50s. Now you'll know all about 1969's Seiko Astron, which was the culmination of a fascinating story I've discussed elsewhere on my video on the origins and evolution of the digital watch. Seiko were clued into this emerging technology, but they took a swerve with LEDs, so you won't find those. But Masatoshi Toyama from Daini Seikosha, who would later become the director, did note the 1968 Life magazine article on liquid crystal, entitled The Chameleon Chemical, based upon the work of Professor James Lee Ferguson at Kent State Uni, a prolific inventor. Now this whole story is more politicized than you might think, with disputes around who was first. For example, see the book Mr. Liquid Crystal on Prof. Ferguson. Seiko shopped around, meeting with RCA Labs, who were developing the dynamic scattering displays that would ultimately not be the dominant type, with Seiko starting their own research into this in December 1968 with Tohoku University, but they would transition to the field effect type based upon prototypes they saw from Professor Ferguson. And this would form the basis of prototype versions of a 6-digit 06LC LCD that was able to show seconds, which was an innovation at the time, starting in 1971, with commercial production of the 0614 starting in 1973. The 05LC was a 4-digit display that came out in 1973, very Space Odyssey looking, with an integrated circuit from the company SSS Inc. in the US, and I believe an LCD from Micro Display Systems in Dallas, Texas. Now Daini Seikosha also launched the 0114 in the same year, and 1974's 0624 is called the lemon face by enthusiasts because of the presence of a yellow gel between the crystal and the LCD. I like the little digital date display window in the Daini Seikosha 0124, which has a light that you turn on by pressing the crown, with them also releasing the month and year M154. Now one of Seiko's claims to fame after the 6-digit was a claim to be the world's first multifunction digital watch. In other words, the world's first digital LCD chronograph, with the 0634A and 0634B, with the 0644 being a bit more basic. 1976 brought the 0654, the functional but retro-looking 0662A from Daini Seikosha, and the thin movement of the 0439A. 1977 sees a whole bunch of cool stuff. We see Seiko's first digital quartz alarm with the A029, the 0664, and even the more cool 0674 worn by James Bond in The Spy Who Loves Me, although in the film it was attached to a fax printer. The A159 and the Suwa A158 alarm chronograph for me epitomizes the look of a lot of these digital watches of the era that you see floating around on eBay these days. The ladies would get a cool watch with the FO23 and a very attractive gold FO51. I believe 2 time zones came into play with 1975's 0139. You can press the button to toggle zone 2, and the crown adjusts between seconds or dates as well as setting the time. One of my favourite watches is the Suwa 1977 World Time N158, often called the PANAM, apparently due to its favour amongst pilots, another lemon face. Skipping forward temporarily, we see Daini's World Time in 1979 with the FC001 caliber A239, and check out the lovely map display. Apparently this is a result of having 2 screens, that is a dual layer LCD, with one having the map, and there were different colours too, with red, green and black maps. What a classic watch. 1977 saw the introduction of cool tech with the Seiko version of a calculator watch, the C153. I'll skip along the timeline a bit and show some of the other calculator watches, such as the C359 and the C439 in 1979, and one of their nicest calculator watches, the C515, I believe was released around 1983. Suwa's first Ana-digi model would be released in 1979 with the H127 6-digit LCD with 2 analog hands, which is a style copied by many, such as this Armatron watch. Ana-digi would continue to flow with the H249 by Daini Seikosha, but Suwa beats them by making it into Bond yet again in For Your Eyes Only. 1981 saw a very retro and cool looking watch, often called the robot face, which was the Ana-digi H23 A39 with a speaker mounted on the front. Look at these fun Japanese ads, really makes me want one. 1985's View to a Kill contained another Ana-digi with the H558 diver, with a late 1980s Ana-digi example being the H461. But back to 1978, where Seiko introduces the LC Memory Bank Calendar FX003 with caliber N354. I think this watch looks great with the calendar display and contrast, and coolest of all, it was worn by James Bond yet again in Moonraker. We would see Seiko's version of the melody alarm with the melodic alarm, or in some versions labelled Melodia with the A169. I'm likely wrong on the date of this, it may have been earlier as I think there were Japan-only models, but from at least 1979, Seiko digital solars were around. Building on their analog solar, which looks really nice, they came out with Suwa's A156, the first digital solar that they launched outside of Japan. In 1980, Daini would be making solar digitals with the A258. Probably one of the most famous Seiko digitals would appear in 1980, which is the Suwa G757 Sports 100 with funky pseudo-analog display, famously worn in Octopussy, a very in-demand watch. Also available in a silver wave version that has some small differences. The Seiko Pulsar brand would release a cool dot matrix style watch with the D031, with a Seiko version being the DZB028, with another fun one being the so-called big running man, the D138. Another couple of cool later Pulsar models with fun displays were the Y951 and Y716. Now around this time in 81-82 we see a pretty unique thing, which is the Electrochromic digital display, or ECD, in the F63A, apparently supplied by Sharp, which has visible digits even when no voltage is being applied. The electromechanical process is apparently something to do with tungsten trioxide, which exceeds my simple brain, so please do write in the comments if you can explain it simply. A really fun 1981 watch was the first generation Seiko Runner S229, which had a pulse meter, an interesting technology that I've explained elsewhere, a surprisingly deep corner of watchdom with lots of history originating from the original physician's pulse watches. Something which just screams 80s is the SAB001 or ST34 with a string around the chest so that the heartbeat can be measured. Apparently the S234 5000 is worn in Aliens in 1986 by Corporal Dwayne Hicks. Evolution to the pulse meter would continue with the S240 in 1989, and various other first generation runners like the SBB X001 will come back to the second generation later. Now here is one that really caught my imagination, so apologies in advance for getting carried away. So Dr. Owen Garriott bought two of his personal Sports 100, which is sometimes silver wave branded, Seikos from the A829 series, the SMGG11 and SMGG13, and he brought them onto the 1983 STS-9 Space Lab mission, and it utilizes a system where you can change the mode using the 8-sided bezel. A random side note is that Owen Garriott's son was Richard Garriott, and for the geeks among you, he's only Lord British, who designed the Ultima series of computer games. Now, playing Ultima 7 and 8 were amongst my best and most frustrating memories from childhood, so it was really cool to make this link. Interestingly, Richard Garriott was the first private citizen to buy a ticket to fly into space as a tourist with Space Adventures, but he actually had to sell his ticket to Dennis Tito after financial challenges, but he would later successfully get into space as a tourist on the International Space Station in 2007, and it looks like he was wearing a watch, but unfortunately it was an analog. Boo. But put in the comments if you know what the watch is. Anyway, the A829 is definitely one of the cooler watches I've surfaced in my research. Check out the back, and has put the idea into my head that I need to do a dedicated digital watches in space episode. Let me know if that's one you'd like to see. Despite its space links, it's actually a yacht timer, which is what many of the functions are designed for, and according to the Vintage Digital Watch channel, which does a nice breakdown of the watch, it was in the film 2010 on the wrist of Roy Schneider, famous for also wearing a Casio in Blue Thunder, of course. Phew! Right, if you enjoyed that nugget of info, listen to the subscribe snail and click and subscribe. He will be watching you. Right, with that done, let's transition to one of those watches that you see in the history books everywhere. Well, the ones I read anyway, which is the world's first TV watch with the T001, followed by the T002, which would be listed in the Guinness Book of Records as being the world's smallest TV. This would also be worn in Octopussy, although it was modified by Q Branch to be in colour. We see some novelty style watches as well, with the fun voice synthesizer Y823, the awesome DBE 018 with the M516, as well as gaming watches like football with the Y666, UFOs with the Y700, shooting games with Y760, and a voice game under the Alba brand with the Y822. I'm not going to show loads of their watches, but it's worth knowing that the Argos favourite Loris was launched by Seiko in 1983, although do check out Russell from the Mad Watch Collector's cool vintage one that he recently picked up. They would also launch a radio watch with the W601, which I've seen under the Loris brand, and Giugiaro even ventured into the digital realm, in addition to his amazing analog watches with 1983's digital chronograph driver's Speedmaster, the A828, so named because of the tilt that helps you read it when your hands are on the steering wheel. Now Seiko were extending their memory capability in 1983 with the 112-digit D409, and 1984 would have more memo watches like the UW01A and S501, but we get into the realms of total awesomeness as we approach the wristwatch computers with the immense UC2000, complete with docking station and worn by Tommy Lee Jones in Black Moon Rising. Even more fun is that you can even add game ROM packs. The Epson branded RC20 would remove the need for the docking station, as you could use an interface cable. This technological development for the yuppies of the time continued into 1985 when I was 1 year old with the RC4000 and 4500 wrist terminals. I was surprised to learn, as I'd not seen many before I investigated this, that Seiko did a whole bunch of very nice professional sports digitals in the late 80s and early 90s. Of course, in the more basic sports range, the 80s would see plenty of Sports 100 and Silverwave models like the A914, DBF028, and in the 90s the Sports 150 A906, but how about these more specific ones with the Racing Master A781 in 1988, triathlete models competing with Timex's Ironman, the seriously awesome Ski Thermo S820 with rotating bezel for mode changes so you don't need to take off your ski gloves with the 3 cool colorways, and 1992's Seiko Cross Training, the exceptionally cool digital Scuba Master SBK002 in 1990, with 92 or maybe 93 bringing the S800 Scuba, the SBBA001 in 1992, and SBCK001. And how about this Marine Master diving computer, the SBDK001? Other professional watches would get the digital treatment too, like the hybrid Field Master SBB-V001. Now 1991 saw the temperature sensor W730 Alti Memory with altimeter, barometer, altitude, memory recall, and alarm that covered both daily and altitude instances. Now G-Shock and Casio were killing it with the various sensor-focused watches, so it seems that this was Seiko's play in that area. The Seiko Receptor message watch was a watch with paging capability with an antennae in the wristband that could pick up FM signals from an automated service that you could call, and you could also have subscription services like weather, sports scores, lottery, and other such things. Following Younghans, Seiko apparently did try some radio-controlled watches like this 1998 SBJK003 and this S750 radio wave control solar. This would be applied again in the SBPG003. Now from at least 1998 we see these R-Sus models, meaning radical, simple and strong. One that I really liked as it ties back into my most recent video on surf watches, please go and watch it, annoyingly it's one I missed, is the Alba Spoon, which was targeted at the youth board riders of the day, including skateboarders and of course surfers. I'd actually not come across these, but there are some really cool ones, with a highlight being this 1999 version with mysterious display linked into the whole Millennium Bug Y2K thing, I think. To go with your pump-up Nike Air Max, why not a Seiko airpro? Starting in 1997, there'll be some cool iterations up until 1999. A mad one, which I'm not sure of the release date of, but was in the 90s I believe, was the Seiko Frequency drum machine watch. A very retro option is 1999's h-timetron, the H standing for happy, which harkened back to the older computer technologies. For the UK folks, it reminds me of CFAX or teletext, combined with a spacey aesthetic. A watch already looking to be retro when it was released, which I suppose now makes it doubly retro, with a few limited edition versions. You can see the occasional use of digitals in more analog-centric watches like the late 90s Giugiaro designed Macchina Sportiva SBCH001. A new generation of runner watches would arrive in 1995 with the so-called Super Runners, with the S640, which enabled you to log runs across 4 channels and each having 120 laps. Different versions in the series would be available over time, including this S670 for the 2012 Tokyo Marathon, the SSVD001, the BDF-021 in 2010, the Super Runners X with the SBD H011, the Smart Lap models with the SBE H005, and the pedometer watches with the SBDE001. A technology that seems to re-energize Seiko a little bit in looking back at their digitals was the e-ink based watches, which was the technology behind things like the Kindle. In 2005, there was a prototype of an e-ink watch, the Spectrum, which was a bracelet-style watch for women, with 2007 seeing another Spectrum bracelet-style watch with so-called efficiency and mystery modes. The coolest though was obviously in 2010 with the Active Matrix e-ink electrophoretic display SDG-A003. I kind of want one of these. Over time, there's been some digital iterations of their more famous professional analog watches. For example, a digital alpinist in 3 colorways, the SBEB001 in 2014, which had a 2016 update with the SBEL007, a hybrid solar version of the Arnie in 2019 with the SNJ025P1, the Seiko Prospex Fieldmaster Beams limited edition using traditional emergency rescue colours, and the recent Seiko Digital Tuner SBEP023. Good to see that they'll occasionally bring out a digital under the Seiko brand, considering they've got such an awesome history. And that's it for today's video. No doubt I've missed loads of cool ones, so leave a comment with any juicy Seiko digitals I've missed. Consider liking and subscribing, and have a great rest of your day.